The history of the automotive industry is, in many ways, a history of innovation. For decades, engineers have raced to come up with better solutions, whether in performance, comfort, efficiency, or something else entirely. The goal has always been the same: to make the driving experience more enjoyable, to make it better. Many of these innovations have stood the test of time, so we know exactly when features like anti-lock brakes first appeared in production cars, or who introduced touchscreens to the dashboard. But there's a long list of features once thought to be revolutionary that, for one reason or another, didn't last. Today, we're diving into those forgotten gems, 25 super cool car features that time left behind. Let's get started. Without question, the hydro-pneumatic suspension was, and still is, one of the most groundbreaking innovations that delivered an unmatched level of comfort and handling. The French manufacturer Citroën was the one to come up with this amazing technical solution, and soon enough, models like the iconic DS would become the most comfortable cars on the market. The ride was so superior to a more conventional suspension that even Rolls-Royce, the world's most luxurious automaker, licensed Citroën's technology to make their super luxury cars as comfortable. But it was also overly complicated and required meticulous maintenance, which would often lead to costly repairs. After a couple of decades of dominance, an alternative was found in the form of adaptive air or electronically controlled suspension. Comfort wasn't at the same level, but it was close enough to leave hydro-pneumatic suspension behind. Back in the day, Ford came up with a brilliant idea to improve ease of entry and exit. It introduced the so-called swing-away system, which allowed the steering wheel to move out of the way and make in and out far more convenient. The 1958 Ford Mercury Turnpike Cruiser was the first car to feature it, while the system was perfected in later models like Thunderbird. But this design never became a widespread standard, as adjustable and telescoping steering columns would appear soon after, as a simpler and more cost-effective solution. Also, a retractable steering wheel probably wouldn't pass modern safety standards, so there's a good reason why it belongs to history books now. Rolls-Royce's Spirit of Ecstasy, Mercedes-Benz's three-point star, to Cadillac's legendary crests, hood ornaments have always been a symbol of prestige and brand identity, a statement of craftsmanship that would make high-end cars instantly recognizable. And we have no doubt that these automakers would use them even today if there weren't safety regulations. Because pedestrian impact standards don't allow these things anymore, they are considered dangerous in collisions, so automakers don't use them, while a small number of luxury models still feature retractable ones. But altogether, the era of prominent hood ornaments ended a couple of decades ago. Behind-the-plate fuel fillers are some of the coolest features of old American cars from the 1950s and 60s. They would make the car look super clean and quite practical, in the way that refueling would be convenient regardless of which side of the pump a driver pulled up to. But there were downsides too, as refueling would become tricky in icy and muddy situations. Not to mention that fuel spills would lead to damage. But more than anything else, new safety and emissions regulations required more accessible systems, so fillers on the sides prevailed. Introduced by Chrysler in the 1950s, a push-button transmission was one of the biggest innovations back in the day. Instead of a classic gear lever, drivers would select gears by using buttons mounted on the dashboard or center console. It was a fancy, futuristic, and quite convenient system. Not to mention that it eliminated the need for a cumbersome gear level and provided more interior space. But more conventional floor and column shifters eventually turned out more reliable, which, along with advancements in automatic transmission technology, made push-button systems fade into the past. Back in the day, it was impossible to imagine a car without an ashtray. Integrated into the dashboard, door panels, and center console, they were quintessential features of every car, even in the back seats. In fact, ashtrays were so important that car manufacturers would pay special attention to their design, bringing unique shapes, chrome finishes, etc. But then people shifted toward healthier lifestyles. The number of smokers went down significantly, and the demand for ashtrays with them. You will hardly find an ashtray in a modern car. So today we look at them rather as a nostalgic reminder of some simpler, better times. Although they can still be found in some basic pickup trucks, front bench seats are mostly history. Something that reminds us of things like long drives, drive-in movies, etc. These benches were considered a perk back in the day, but then bucket seats came, offering more adjustability and better support. Simply, they were a more practical choice, while later safety regulations and the introduction of airbags made individual seating a natural choice. Nevertheless, many of us still feel nostalgic about the comfy lounge-like driving experience. Once upon a time, vinyl roofs were considered glamorous. That's right. Back in the 1960s and 70s, they were reserved for upscale models like Lincoln, Cadillac, and Chrysler, adding a touch of distinction by mimicking the look of a classic convertible top. But times changed, and by 1980, such a design approach wasn't considered appealing anymore. Not to mention that they weren't particularly durable, but rather prone to cracking, fading, and trapping moisture, which would lead to hidden rust and body damage. So manufacturers eventually switched to more durable, high-gloss finishes. No matter the body style, luggage racks were a common feature back in the day. Mounted on the roof or rear deck, they allowed drivers to carry bulky items like suitcases or camping gear without sacrificing interior space. Decades ago, luggage racks were pretty much a symbol of adventure, but times have changed. Today, consumers prefer much bigger vehicles, SUVs and minivans, with significantly more cargo space behind the rear seats, which reduce the need for external storage and luggage racks. Okay, you can still find them on off-road and adventure-focused SUVs, but when it comes to passenger cars, classic chrome racks disappeared long ago. Opera windows are definitely one of those design solutions we won't be seeing again. Popular in the 1970s, particularly in luxury coupes like Lincoln Continental Mark and Chrysler Cordoba, these small decorative rear side windows were the statement of luxury, but the fact is that there wasn't much practical purpose. These windows were there only for the sake of aesthetics, and that's why they phased out relatively quickly when car manufacturers shifted to more conventional designs that would provide better visibility and make rear passengers feel less claustrophobic. Believe it or not, record players were once installed in cars. Back in the 1950s, manufacturers like Chrysler had the idea of bringing high-quality music into cars, with specially designed slow-speed records that would minimize skipping. Other manufacturers tried their own versions with standard 45 RPM records, but the idea of having a personal jukebox in a car turned out quite impractical because it was impossible to ensure uninterrupted playback. Simply said, the idea was great, but the execution wasn't. So now we can only look at it as one fascinating but not particularly practical chapter of the automotive audio history. Landau bards originated from horse-drawn carriages, where they were used on convertible tops to indicate folding roof mechanism. In cars, their purpose was purely aesthetic, purely ornamental, reserved for luxury sedans and coupes, especially with those vinyl roofs. The idea was to evoke old-world elegance and prestige, but by the 1980s, car design moved towards sleeker, more modern aesthetics, and Landau bars began to feel outdated. In the 1990s, they vanished almost entirely, and nowadays, they represent a relic of a time when the approach to automotive styling was a completely different dimension. If you think about it, there was no simpler and more effective way to control high beams than with floor dimmers. Essentially, it was a floor-operated button located on the left side of the driver's footwell. The hands-free operation seems way more convenient than reaching for a stalk in the steering column. So why would car manufacturers change such a handy solution? Well, it turned out that the switch was prone to dirt, moisture, and wear, especially in regions with harsh winters. So, by the 1980s, most manufacturers moved the dimmer function to a safer place, the steering column. When talking strictly about aesthetics, is there a more iconic styling trend in the automotive history than tail fins? It was the age of progress, the age of America's fascination with space exploration. So car designers took those dramatic sweeping fins and incorporated them in some of the most iconic models of the era, such as the 1959 Cadillac Eldorado and Chrysler Forward Look models. But as the 1960s arrived, tastes changed and started to lean towards sleeker, understated designs, let alone the fact these fancy details would only add extra cost to the production process. Overall, there aren't many trends in car design that marked a specific era as tail fins did. Cathode ray tube screens are probably the first attempt to bring advanced displays into cars, appearing in high-end models in the late 1980s. As for American car makers, Buick was the first one to experiment with this kind of touchscreen, with the 1986 Riviera, with digital controls for climate, audio, and diagnostics. It was a groundbreaking technology that gave drivers a futuristic high-tech experience. But it wouldn't take much time before LCD and later OLED technology took over, with more compact dimensions, better responses, and vibrant displays. CRT screens lived short, but they definitely left a big mark in the automotive industry. Back in the late 1980s and early 90s, car phones were pretty much the ultimate status symbol, the epitome of luxury and convenience. It was a cutting-edge technology that provided a huge convenience for business professionals and high-profile individuals, but still, they didn't last for too long. By the end of the 1990s, cell phones had completely taken over for obvious reasons. Built-in car phones would quickly fade and remain just a chapter in history books when making calls on the go was reserved only for the wealthiest. While quite an uncommon feature in American cars, headlight wipers were rather essential pieces of equipment for various premium brands from Europe, like Mercedes-Benz, Volvo, and Saab. These tiny wipers, coupled with washer jets, were designed to ensure better visibility. But with the advance of new technologies, such as high-pressure washer systems, hydrophobic coatings, and self-cleaning LED units, the need for physical wipers diminished almost entirely, because you can still find this quirky feature in a couple of hardcore off-roaders. In the passenger car universe, they've become a thing of the past long ago. Although most people think that white wall tires were a status symbol back in the day, the fact is that they were originally a byproduct of early manufacturing. The outer layer of white rubber was more expensive and reserved for sidewalls, while the tread area was reinforced with black carbon for durability. But soon enough, white walls would become a fashionable detail that adds elegance and sophistication. With the arrival of 1960, white walls would start to fall out of favor gradually and disappear by the 1980s. With modern low-profile tires, it's clear that this trend will never come back if we exclude restored classics and vintage-inspired customs, of course. The 1950s, 60s, and 70s were definitely a more elegant era of automotive design, and you don't need a better proof than swiveling front seats. Because what's more elegant than ensuring that women in skirts, or elderly people, can get in and out with style? Just check out models like the Chrysler Imperial, Oldsmobile Toronado, or Chevy Monte Carlo. All these cars featured front seats that can rotate outward when the door is open. It was pure grace, but still, the mechanism would add complexity and would wear over time. Then safety regulations came, seats got integrated airbags, and it was clear that swiveling seats were done, unfortunately. Rear hinge doors, better known as suicide doors, never fully disappeared. A couple of modern luxury cars, like Rolls-Royce models, still use it, but the fact is that you won't find them in any mass production cars, which is a shame. This design would allow much easier access to the second row, and it was particularly handy in the case of chauffeur-driven cars. The aesthetic impact was there too, but safety concerns prevailed. It's not just about the possibility that the door could accidentally open while driving. Once crash tests became a common thing, it became clear that such cars couldn't ensure structural integrity and occupant protection. So automakers had no other option but to move toward front hinge doors. Here's one car feature that no one ever missed. Back in the 1970s, the US government had a plan to improve traffic safety by implementing a system that would prevent cars from starting unless the driver and front passengers had their seatbelts fastened. It was intrusive and frustrating, especially when dealing with short trips, heavy coats, not to mention malfunctioning sensors. We're not sure if there was a stronger public backlash, but this one forced Congress to repeal the mandate and shift to reminder chimes and warning lights, which remain standard up to these days. Unlike seatbelt interlocks, automatic seatbelts were actually a pretty cool feature that gained traction back in the 1980s and early 1990s. The idea was to secure the driver and the front passenger with motorized belts that would slide along a track. It was a great idea, but never executed completely. For example, most systems would only secure the shoulder belt, while the lap belt would still remain secured manually, which most drivers would simply ignore. Also, mechanical failures were frequent, so soon enough, things went from cool to annoying. With the introduction of mandatory dual front airbags, this quirky feature quickly disappeared, but we still remember it as one of the coolest attempts of improving safety. Vent windows were one of the most practical car features through most of the automotive history. Simple and easy to use, they were perfect for adjusting airflow without fully lowering the main window. Vent windows were perfect for reducing fogging, and drivers loved them because of the significantly lower wind noise compared to fully open side windows. But with the advancement of air conditioning and improved cabin ventilation, they mostly disappeared from modern vehicles, which is a shame, considering that modern vehicles still haven't solved one big issue vent windows were dealing with ease. We are talking about pushing the vent window out, which would create a negative air pressure vacuum that would suck the air out, which was particularly appreciated by smokers. Chevy Camaro, Pontiac Firebird, Toyota Supra. These sports car icons all have one thing in common. They used to feature so-called T-tops as one of their key aesthetic features. These removable roof panels would allow for an open-air experience without sacrificing the structural integrity of a vehicle, like it's the case with convertibles. It was a perfect design solution for a sunroof-like driving experience while maintaining a more secure and enclosed car. But this design had drawbacks too. The removable panels were prone to leaks, and the sealant around the edges would deteriorate and let water into the cabin. So most automakers switched to convertible and sunroof options, though T-tops remained one of the most beloved features among lovers of classic sports cars. Okay, this is an easy guess because we are talking about arguably the most iconic feature of numerous sports cars, from the 1960s to 1990s. Pop-up headlights decorated so many iconic models, but unfortunately, we'll never see them again. It's partly because of maintenance concerns due to motorized mechanisms and added complexity, but it's mostly because of stricter safety regulations that made pop-up regulations. No sports car will ever reach the heights of icons like the Ferrari F40, Jaguar XJ220, Lamborghini Miura, Chevy Corvette, Mazda RX-7, Honda NSX, Mazda Miata, and many, many more. What do you think of these cool car features that time left behind? Which one do you miss the most? Which one do you believe could come back eventually? Write in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.